Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as I made my way down the dirt path that cut through Willow Creek Farm. It was my usual evening walk, a ritual I'd started to clear my head after long days of writing. The breeze was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of freshly cut hay and the promise of autumn. I breathed deeply, savoring the tranquility. My footsteps crunched softly on the gravel, the rhythm soothing and familiar. To my right, rows of corn stretched as far as the eye could see, their stalks swaying gently in the wind. To my left, an open field lay fallow, with a solitary scarecrow standing sentinel. Old Tom, they called it. The scarecrow had been there for as long as anyone could remember, its burlap face weathered and faded, its straw-stuffed limbs akimbo in an eternal pose of menace towards imaginary crows. I'd passed it 100 times before, never giving it more than a passing glance. But tonight was different. As I drew level with Old Tom, a whisper drifted on the wind, so faint I almost missed it. "Jack." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It had sounded like my name, but that was impossible. I was alone on this path, the nearest house a good half-mile away. Must be hearing things, I muttered to myself, shaking my head. Too many late nights working on that damn novel. I resumed walking, picking up my pace slightly. The sun dipped lower, lengthening the shadows across the field. Old Tom's shadow stretched grotesquely, seeming to reach for me. "Jack." There it was again, louder this time. Unmistakable. My name, whispered on a wind that suddenly felt colder than it should for early September. I stopped again, my skin prickling with goosebumps. Slowly, I turned to face the scarecrow. Old Tom stood as it always had, arms outstretched, hat askew, that crude burlap face staring blankly across the field. But something felt off. Maybe it was the play of shadows in the fading light, but I could have sworn those empty eye holes were fixed on me. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish even as I did so. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. Not even the corn rustled. I laughed nervously. "Get a grip, Jack," I told myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild again." But as I turned to continue my walk, the whisper came again, so close it could have been breathed directly into my ear. "Jack. Come to me, Jack." I whirled around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The scarecrow hadn't moved, but now I was certain its eyes were focused on me. Those black, empty sockets seemed to bore into my soul, filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "It's not real," I said aloud, trying to convince myself. "Scarecrows don't whisper. They don't move. It's just a trick of the light, that's all." But even as I spoke, I saw Old Tom's straw-filled hand twitch. I looked down in horror to see straw sprouting from my skin, replacing flesh and bone. "No!" I screamed. "I'm not one of you." Old Tom loomed over me, its straw hands reaching for my face. "But you are, Jack. You've always been one of us. You just forgot for a while." I thrashed wildly, fighting against the transformation. "No! Leave me alone!" My eyes snapped open, a scream dying in my throat. The bedroom was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of my alarm clock. 4:23 a.m. I lay there, gasping for breath, trying to calm my racing heart. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. I wasn't alone. The sensation of another presence in the room was overwhelming. I could feel eyes on me watching from the shadows. Panic clawed at my chest as I slowly turned my head towards the corner of the room. There, in the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of movement, the faintest rustle of straw. "No," I whispered. "You're not real. You can't be here." I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers trembling as they searched for the switch. In my haste, I knocked the lamp over. It hit the floor with a crash that seemed deafening in the silent room. In the moment before I could right the lamp, I saw it clearly. A hand, made of twisted straw and shadow, reaching out from the corner. Old Tom's hand, here in my bedroom miles away from that cursed field. "This isn't happening," I said, my voice cracking with terror. "Wake up, Jack, wake up!" I finally grasped the lamp and switched it on. Light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows. I looked to the corner, my heart in my throat. Nothing. The corner was empty. No scarecrow, no hand of straw. Just the usual clutter of my bachelor lifestyle, a pile of laundry I'd been meaning to wash, some books stacked haphazardly. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. "You're really losing it, old boy," I told myself. "Maybe it's time to ease up on the late-night horror movies." But as I went to turn off the lamp, movement caught my eye. The curtains by my window billowed gently. Frowning, I got out of bed and went to investigate. The window was wide open. I stood there, staring at the open window in disbelief. I always kept it locked. Always. Especially after what happened in the field. So how? A cool breeze blew in, carrying with it the scent of cornfields and decay. And there, caught on the window latch, was a single piece of straw. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the wall. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. And yet, "It's real," I whispered, the truth finally sinking in. "Oh God, it's all real." As if in response, a whisper drifted in on the breeze, faint, but unmistakable. "Come home, Jack." I hugged my knees to my chest, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down my face. The scarecrow was real. It had followed me home. And somehow I knew this was only the beginning. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I sat there by the open window, too terrified to move, too terrified to close my eyes, because I knew now that the nightmare wasn't confined to my dreams. It was here, in the waking world, and it wanted me. Old Tom was coming for me, and deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, a part of me was longing to answer its call, to return to that field and take my place among the whispering scarecrows. The sun was sinking low on the horizon as I found myself once again on the dirt path leading to Willow Creek Farm. My hands trembled as I walked, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But something stronger than fear pulled me forward, a compulsion I couldn't explain or resist. "This is insane," I muttered to myself, eyeing the cornfields warily. "What the hell am I doing back here?" But I knew why. The nightmares, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. They had worn me down. I needed answers, even if those answers terrified me. As I rounded the bend, Old Tom came into view. The scarecrow stood motionless on its post, arms outstretched, that crude burlap face staring blankly across the field. Just like always. Just like it should be. I stopped a few yards away, my heart pounding. "All right," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here. What do you want from me?" Silence answered me. Not even the corn rustled. Old Tom remained stubbornly inanimate, a simple scarecrow once more. "Come on," I shouted, anger briefly overriding my fear. "I know you're real. I've seen you move, heard you whisper. Stop playing games." Still nothing. I took a hesitant step closer, then another. The air around me seemed to thicken, making each breath a struggle. It was like walking through invisible molasses, every movement requiring immense effort. As I drew nearer to Old Tom, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me despite it being a warm September evening. Goosebumps erupted across my skin, and I hugged myself tightly, trying to ward off the unnatural chill. "What are you?" I whispered, now standing directly before the scarecrow. Up close I could see the wear and tear of years exposed to the elements. The burlap was frayed, the straw poking through in places. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. But I could feel it. A presence, a weight in the air around old Tom, like standing next to a predator, feeling its eyes on you even if you can't see them. Every instinct screamed danger. Run. Hide. I reached out a trembling hand, inches away from touching the scarecrow's worn shirt. "Show yourself," I said softly. "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me." Just as my fingertips were about to make contact, a gust of wind whipped through the field. I stumbled back, startled by its sudden ferocity. The cornstalks bent and swayed violently, their rustling now a roar in my ears, and carried on that wind I heard it. My name. Jack. I spun around, my eyes wide with panic. The voice hadn't come from old Tom. It had come from behind me, from within the corn itself. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Show yourself." The wind died down as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. I peered into the rows of corn, straining to see any sign of movement. There, a flash of something pale darting between the stalks. I caught only a glimpse, a face perhaps, or just a trick of the fading light. "Hey!" I shouted, plunging into the cornfield without thinking. "Wait!" I pushed through the rows, the leaves slapping against my face and arms. The figure always remained just out of reach, visible for a split second before vanishing again. Man or scarecrow, I couldn't tell. It moved with an unnatural speed and grace, weaving through the corn as if it were part of it. "Please," I called out, my lungs burning as I ran. "I just want to talk. I need to understand what's happening to me." I burst into a small clearing, panting heavily. The figure was nowhere to be seen. I spun in a circle, searching desperately for any sign of my elusive quarry. "Where are you?" I yelled, frustration and fear making my voice crack. "What do you want from me?" "Jack." The whisper came from directly behind me. I whirled around, my heart nearly stopping at what I saw. It wasn't old Tom. This scarecrow was different, smaller, newer. Its burlap face was smooth, unmarred by weather. And the features, they were crude, yes, but unmistakably familiar. They were my features. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The scarecrow, my doppelganger, stood motionless, its stitched eyes seeming to stare into my soul. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The scarecrow's mouth didn't move, but I heard the response clearly in my mind. "We are you, Jack. The you that belongs here. The you that never should have left." I shook my head violently. No, that's impossible. I was never. You've forgotten." The voice in my head continued. "But we remember. We've been waiting for you to come home." Memories flashed through my mind, distorted, dreamlike. A childhood spent in these fields. The rustle of corn and whisper of straw more familiar than any human voice. The feeling of belonging, of being part of something ancient and powerful. "No!" I screamed, clutching my head. "These aren't my memories. This isn't real." I turned to run, to escape this nightmare, but found myself face to face with old Tom. The ancient scarecrow had left its post, now standing at the edge of the clearing, and behind it, emerging from the corn, came others. Dozens of scarecrows, each unique, yet all bearing that same hungry grin. "Welcome home, Jack," they whispered in unison, their voices dry as dead leaves. "It's time to remember who you really are." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. The scarecrows circled me, their straw hands reaching out. I felt something stirring deep within me, a part of myself I had buried long ago. As the last light faded from the sky and darkness engulfed the cornfield, I realized the terrifying truth. I hadn't come back to this field by chance or compulsion. I had come home, and the harvest was about to begin. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick fog that had settled over Willow Creek Farm. I stood at the edge of the cornfield, my eyes fixed on old Tom's distant silhouette. Sleep had eluded me since my encounter in the field, and exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders. "You shouldn't be here, son." The gravelly voice startled me. I turned to see an old man approaching, his weathered face etched with lines of worry. He leaned on a gnarled walking stick, his rheumy eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was just—" The old farmer waved off my apology. "This ain't about trespassing, boy. It's about your life." He glanced nervously at the cornfield. "You've heard it, haven't you? The whispers?" A chill ran down my spine. "How did you know?" He sighed heavily, suddenly looking every bit his advanced age. "I've seen that look before. The haunted eyes, the way you can't stop staring at that damned scarecrow." He spat on the ground. "You ain't the first to hear its call, and I reckon you won't be the last." "You know about old Tom?" I asked, hope and dread warring in my chest. "Please, I need to understand what's happening to me." The farmer was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving the cornfield. Finally, he nodded towards a nearby fence. "Sit down, son. This ain't a story for standing." We settled onto the worn wooden fence. The old man pulled out a pipe, his gnarled fingers working methodically to pack it with tobacco. "Name's Ezra," he said, puffing the pipe to life. "Been farming this land for nigh on 60 years. But the thing in that field? It's been here a lot longer." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ezra took a long drag on his pipe before answering. "Folks round here call it Old Tom, but that ain't its real name. Don't rightly know if it has one. What I do know is it ain't no ordinary scarecrow." He launched into a tale that chilled me to my core. According to Ezra, the entity in the field had been there for generations, long before white settlers arrived. The native tribes avoided the area, speaking in hushed tones of a hungry spirit that lived among the corn. First settler to try farming here was a man named Thomas Willow. Ezra continued. Story goes, he ignored the warnings and planted his first crop. Come harvest time, the corn was the best anyone had ever seen. But Thomas, he changed. "Changed how?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Became obsessed with the field. Wouldn't leave it day or night. His wife found him one morning standing in the corn rows, still as a post. When she touched him..." Ezra shuddered. "Nothing but straw inside them clothes. I felt sick." "But that's impossible." Ezra fixed me with a hard stare. "Is it? After what you've seen and heard?" I couldn't argue with that. The old farmer went on, telling me of others who had fallen under the field's spell over the years. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were found wandering the rows, babbling about whispers and hungry shadows. A few, like me, had resisted the call, for a while. "It wants something from us," Ezra said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't rightly know what, but I reckon it ain't good for the soul." "But why me?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I'm not even from around here. I just moved to town a few months ago to work on my novel." Ezra's eyes widened slightly. "A writer, eh? Creative type?" He shook his head. "It likes those. Imagination makes the mind more pliable, I suppose." He told me of a painter who had come to capture the farm's bucolic scenery. They found her easel in the field, the canvas covered in disturbing images of twisted, straw-filled figures reaching out of the corn. "Please," I begged, grabbing Ezra's arm. "How do I stop this? How do I make the whispers go away?" The old farmer's face fell. "I'm sorry, son. Once it's got its hooks in you..." He trailed off, then fixed me with a fierce gaze. "Listen to me. You need to leave. Pack up and go, far away from here. Maybe, just maybe, you can outrun it." But even as he spoke, I knew it was too late. The pull of the field was too strong, the whispers too insistent. A part of me, a part that grew stronger each day, didn't want to leave. Ezra must have seen the realization in my eyes. He gripped my shoulder, his voice urgent. "Fight it, boy. Whatever you do, don't give in. Don't answer when it calls your name." I nodded, but the gesture felt hollow. Ezra climbed down from the fence with a groan, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "Remember what I told you," he said as he turned to leave. "And for God's sake, stay out of that field after dark." As Ezra shuffled away, a gust of wind ruffled his thinning hair. My blood ran cold as I caught a glimpse of something poking out from beneath his hat. A wisp of what looked unmistakably like straw. "Ezra, wait!" I called out, but the old farmer didn't turn back. He disappeared into the fog, leaving me alone with my terror and the looming presence of the cornfield. I stared at old Tom's distant form, Ezra's warnings echoing in my mind. The scarecrow stood motionless, but I could feel its attention on me, patient and hungry. "What are you?" I whispered. As if in answer, the wind picked up, carrying with it the rustle of corn leaves and a familiar, dreaded whisper. "Jack, come home, Jack." I stumbled away from the fence, my heart pounding. Ezra was right. I needed to leave, to run as far from this place as I could. But even as I formed the thought, I knew it was futile. The tendrils of old Tom's influence had worked their way deep into my psyche. Wherever I went, the whispers would follow. The call of the corn would haunt my dreams, and sooner or later, I knew I would answer. As I walked back to my car on shaky legs, I cast one final glance over my shoulder. For a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn I saw old Tom's arm raise, its straw hand waving a mocking farewell. The harvest was coming, and I was powerless to stop it. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through my bedroom window, rousing me from a fitful sleep. As I stretched, my hand brushed against something rough and unfamiliar. Frowning, I sat up and peered at my sheets. Scattered across the bed were small pieces of straw. "No," I whispered, my heart racing. "No, no, no." I leapt out of bed, frantically brushing the straw from my clothes and skin. Where had it come from? I hadn't been near the cornfield in days, not since my conversation with Ezra. I'd been actively avoiding it, in fact. As I moved, I noticed something else. My joints felt stiff, creaking with each movement like old wood. I flexed my fingers, wincing at the unfamiliar sensation. "It's just in your head," I told myself, trying to stay calm. "You're letting your imagination run wild again." But as I went through my morning routine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My skin felt different, rougher, almost abrasive. When I ran my hand over my face, the texture reminded me unsettlingly of burlap. I avoided looking in the mirror as I brushed my teeth, afraid of what I might see. But eventually, morbid curiosity got the better of me. Taking a deep breath, I raised my eyes to my reflection. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, I could have sworn I saw a face made of burlap staring back at me. Crude stitches where my mouth should be, hollow eye holes instead of eyes. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. But my eyes, they looked different, sunken, empty. "This isn't happening," I said to my reflection. "You're losing it, Jack. Get a grip." I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shock myself back to reality, but the rough texture of my skin remained, and my joints continued to creak ominously with every movement. As the day wore on, panic began to set in. I needed to get out of this town, away from that cursed field and whatever influence it held over me. I threw some clothes into a suitcase, not bothering to pack neatly. "I'm leaving," I announced to my empty apartment. "I'm getting in my car and driving until I hit the coast. This ends now." But as I drove, a sick feeling of déjà vu began to creep over me. The roads all looked the same, endless stretches of asphalt bordered by cornfields. No matter which turn I took, which direction I drove, I always seemed to end up back where I started. After hours of futile driving, I pulled over, my hand shaking on the steering wheel. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and there in the distance stood old Tom. "This is impossible," I muttered, staring at the scarecrow. I drove for hours. I should be 3 states away by now. As if in response, a whisper drifted through my open window. "Come home, Jack." I slammed the car into gear, tires squealing as I peeled away from the shoulder. But no matter how fast I drove, Old Tom's silhouette remained visible in my rearview mirror. Night fell, and with it came a fog that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. It swirled around my car so thick I could barely see the road. I slowed to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Suddenly, my engine sputtered and died. I turned the key, but nothing happened. The car rolled to a stop, and as the fog cleared, I found myself parked at the edge of the cornfield. "No," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "Please, no." But my body was no longer under my control. I watched in horror as my hand reached for the door handle, as my legs carried me out of the car and towards the waiting corn. The rustling of the stalks sounded like whispered welcomes as I moved deeper into the field. My joints creaked louder with each step, my skin feeling more and more like burlap stretched over a frame of wood and straw. I emerged into a small clearing. Old Tom stood there, arms outstretched in grotesque welcome, and behind it, dozens of other scarecrows emerged from the corn. Some were ancient, their burlap faces weathered and faded. Others looked newer, their stitched features still crisp. All of them were looking at me. "Welcome home, Jack," they whispered in unison, their voices dry as dead leaves. I tried to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body refused to obey. I felt myself walking towards Old Tom's empty post, my movements stiff and unnatural. "Please," I managed to croak out. "I don't want this. I'm not one of you." Old Tom's burlap face seemed to twist into a grin. When it spoke, its voice was inside my head, as familiar as my own thoughts. "But you are, Jack. You always have been. You just forgot for a while." I felt my feet root themselves to the ground, my arms rising to mimic Old Tom's pose. The other scarecrows gathered around, their straw hands reaching out to touch me. "No," I whimpered, feeling the last of my humanity slipping away. "This can't be happening." But it was. I could feel the transformation taking hold, straw replacing blood and bone, burlap swallowing my skin. My vision began to change, the world taking on a strange, muted quality. As the last vestiges of my human self faded away, I heard Old Tom's voice one final time. "The harvest has begun, Jack, and you're going to help us bring it in." I wanted to close my eyes to shut out the horror of what I'd become. But scarecrows don't have eyelids. All I could do was stare out at the cornfield that was now my eternal home, my burlap face frozen in a stitched smile. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of distant traffic. Someone else would be driving down that lonely road soon. Someone else would hear the whispers, feel the pull of the field, and I would be waiting for them alongside my brothers and sisters of straw and shadow, waiting to welcome them home. As the moon rose over the cornfield, casting long shadows across the rows, I stood motionless on my post. No longer Jack the writer, the human, now just another sentinel in a field of nightmares, guarding a harvest that was older than time itself. The transformation was complete. The moon hung low and heavy over the cornfield, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. From my new perch atop the weathered wooden post, I surveyed my domain with eyes that no longer needed to blink. The transformation was complete, my humanity now nothing more than a fading memory wrapped in burlap and straw. As the night deepened, a strange awareness crept over me. My vision seemed to expand, stretching far beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek Farm. In distant fields, pinpricks of awareness flickered to life. Other scarecrows awakening with the fall of darkness. They began to move, abandoning their posts with jerky, unnatural movements. Straw-stuffed legs carried them across furrowed earth and through rows of corn. They were coming to welcome the newest member of their twisted family. Old Tom's voice whispered in my mind, a dry rustle like dead leaves. "Watch, Jack. Learn. You are part of a legacy older than mankind itself." The first of the others entered our field, a scarecrow even more ancient than Old Tom. Its burlap face was so worn that only scraps remained, revealing a skull-like visage of tightly bound straw. It approached my post, tilting its head in an unsettling parody of curiosity. "Fresh soul," it hissed, its voice like wind through bare branches. still warm with humanity. How long since we've had such a tender morsel, brothers and sisters? More scarecrows emerged from the corn, gathering in a circle around me. Some were clearly ancient, their forms weathered by centuries of sun and rain. Others looked newer, their stitched features still crisp and bright. All of them radiated an aura of hunger and anticipation. A scarecrow with a patchwork face of different burlap scraps stepped forward. "Welcome, young one," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You have been chosen to join the harvest. Do you understand the honor that has been bestowed upon you?" I tried to speak, to ask the questions that burned within my straw-filled mind, but no sound emerged from my stitched mouth. Instead, my thoughts projected outward, audible to all gathered. What am I? What are we? Why have you done this to me? A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled scarecrows. Old Tom's voice answered, patient as the earth itself. "We are the caretakers, Jack, the guardians of a power older than time. And now you are one of us." The patchwork scarecrow raised its arms, and the others fell silent. "Listen well, young one," it intoned, "for you must learn the secrets of our ancient ritual. The harvest of souls is our purpose, our sustenance, our very reason for being." Over the next hours, as the moon tracked its path across the star-studded sky, the scarecrows shared their terrible knowledge. They spoke of an entity that slumbered deep beneath the earth, a being of insatiable hunger that fed on human essence. The scarecrows were its servants, its lures, tasked with bringing it the souls it craved. "But why?" I asked, horror and fascination warring within me. "What does it give us in return?" A scarecrow with a face made of corn husks laughed, a sound like dry stalks snapping. "Immortality, young one. Freedom from the frailties of flesh. Power beyond mortal comprehension." They told me of the ritual, a dark ceremony performed beneath the harvest moon. How they would lure unsuspecting victims into the field, whispering their names, playing on their fears and desires. How they would trap them in a maze of corn until dawn, when the entity would rise to claim its prize. "And the victims?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "They join us," Old Tom said simply. "Their essence feeds the sleeper, and their bodies become vessels like ours. The cycle continues, as it has for millennia." As they spoke, I felt something stirring deep within my straw-filled form. A hunger, a desire to be part of this ancient and terrible purpose. It horrified me, this alien need, but I could not deny its power. The patchwork scarecrow sensed my inner turmoil. "Do not fight it, young one," it said. "Embrace your new nature. The harvest is coming, and you have an important role to play." As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the scarecrows dispersed. They returned to their own fields, their own territories, leaving me alone with the weight of my new knowledge. Old Tom's voice, now as familiar as my own thoughts, whispered one final instruction. "Watch the path, Jack. Listen for approaching footsteps. The hunger will guide you in what to do." I stood motionless on my post as the sun rose, bathing the world in golden light. Birds began to sing, insects buzzed, and a gentle breeze rustled through the corn. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful. How could such horror exist in a world of such beauty? As the morning wore on, I heard the crunch of gravel on the nearby path. Two voices, young and carefree, grew louder as they approached. "Come on, Emily. I want to show you my favorite spot for sketching." "I'm coming, Mark. These shoes weren't made for hiking, you know." A young couple came into view, hand in hand. The girl, Emily, carried a sketch pad under one arm. The boy, Mark, pointed excitedly towards a scenic overlook just past my field. As they drew nearer, I felt it. The hunger, the overwhelming urge to call out, to whisper their names, to lure them into the waiting corn. Emily. Mark. The words formed in my mind, begging to be released. I fought against the compulsion with every scrap of humanity I had left. These were innocent people, undeserving of the fate that awaited them in the field. I couldn't be responsible for trapping them in this nightmare. But the hunger was relentless. I felt my stitched mouth begin to move, the whisper building in whatever passed for my throat. Emily. Mark. Come closer. The couple paused, looking around in confusion. Did you hear something? Emily asked, her brow furrowed. Mark shook his head. Just the wind in the corn, probably. Come on, we're almost there. They moved on, passing out of sight around a bend in the path. I sagged on my post, relieved and horrified in equal measure. I had resisted the urge this time, but for how long? How many more innocent people would pass by? How long could I fight against my new nature? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I stood silent vigil over my field. The horror of what I had become, of what I was now part of, settled over me like a shroud. And beneath it all, the hunger continued to gnaw, patient and insistent. The harvest moon hung low in the sky, its sickly yellow light casting long shadows across the cornfield. I stood motionless on my post, a sentinel of straw and burlap, watching, waiting. But beneath the stillness, a war raged within me. I am Jack, I repeated silently, clinging to the remnants of my humanity. I am not one of them. I don't want this. Old Tom's voice slithered through my mind, a whisper of dry leaves. Foolish child, you cannot resist what you are. The harvest approaches. Embrace your purpose. I felt the pull of the ancient entity beneath the earth, its hunger resonating through every stalk of corn, every fiber of my being. But the last spark of my human self rebelled against it. No, I thought fiercely. I won't be a part of this. I won't hurt anyone else. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I focused on moving. Just a twitch, the slightest motion to prove I still had some control. At first, nothing happened. My burlap body remained stubbornly still, rooted to the post. But then, a finger moved. Just the barest tremor, but it was enough. Hope surged through me, giving me strength. That's it, Jack, I encouraged myself. Fight it. You can do this. Slowly, agonizingly, I forced my arm to move. It felt like pushing through molasses, every inch a monumental struggle. But I was moving. I was breaking free. With a final surge of effort, I wrenched myself from the post. My straw-filled legs buckled, unused to movement, and I stumbled forward into the corn. I did it, I thought, elation warring with terror. I'm free. But my triumph was short-lived. A chorus of angry whispers rose from the cornfield, the other scarecrows awakening to my rebellion. The newcomer resists. He must be taught his place. Bring him back, the master hungers. I pushed through the corn, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Stalks whipped at my burlap face, but I pressed on, driven by desperation. Help! I tried to call out, but no sound emerged from my stitched mouth. Someone, please, I'm trapped here. From the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of movement. Other scarecrows advancing through the corn with unnatural speed and grace. Their stitched faces leered at me, straw hands reaching out to grasp and tear. A scarecrow with a patchwork face lunged from between the stalks, its fingers tangling in my shirt. Where do you think you're going, little brother? It hissed. Your place is here with us. I thrashed wildly, tearing free from its grasp, but two more were there to take its place, their burlap hands clawing at me. Let me go, I shouted in my mind, my silent cries lost in the rustle of corn leaves. I'm not one of you, I don't want this. Old Tom's voice cut through the chaos, calm and implacable. You have no choice, Jack, you are part of the harvest now. Accept it. More scarecrows joined the fray, surrounding me in a circle of leering burlap faces and grasping straw hands. They dragged me back through the corn, my struggles growing weaker with each step. As we emerged into the clearing where my post stood, I saw him. Ezra, the old farmer who had tried to warn me. He stood beside old Tom, his weathered face a mask of sorrow and resignation. "I'm sorry, son," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to fight it too, all those years ago. But in the end, we all serve the harvest." I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But my body was no longer my own. The scarecrows forced me back onto my post, my limbs arranging themselves in that eternal mocking pose. Old Tom's voice filled my mind, heavy with disappointment and threat. "You must learn obedience, young one. And there is only one way to teach such a lesson." A new sound reached me then. Footsteps on the gravel path, and a voice humming tunelessly. A young woman came into view, her attention focused on the phone in her hand. "No," I thought, realizing with horror what was about to happen. "Please, not this. Don't make me watch." But I had no choice. My eyes, such as they were, remained fixed on the approaching figure. I felt the familiar hunger rising within me, the compulsion to whisper her name. Jessica. The name formed in my mind, pulled from some dark well of knowledge I didn't understand. "Jessica, come closer." The young woman paused, looking up from her phone with a frown. "Hello? Is someone there?" "Jessica." This time it wasn't just my voice, but a chorus of whispers from every scarecrow in the field. "Come into the corn, Jessica. We've been waiting for you." I fought against it with every fiber of my being, trying to scream a warning, but no sound emerged from my stitched mouth. I could only watch in mute horror as Jessica took a hesitant step towards the cornfield. "Hello?" she called out, peering into the rows. "This isn't funny. Who's out there?" The corn seemed to bend towards her, the stalks rustling with anticipation. I saw other scarecrows moving into position, circling around to cut off her escape. "That's it, Jessica," Old Tom's voice coaxed. "Just a little closer. There's nothing to fear here." Jessica took another step, then another. The moment she passed the first row of corn, I knew it was over. The stalks closed behind her like a door slamming shut. "Wait," she said, her voice rising in panic. "I can't. Where's the path? I need to get out." But there was no escape. I watched, my soul screaming in silent anguish, as Jessica was herded deeper into the field. The scarecrows whispered and laughed, guiding her on a twisting path that led nowhere. Hours passed. Jessica's cries grew hoarse, then faded to whimpers, and still, she wandered, lost in the endless maze of corn. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, I felt it. The stirring beneath the earth, the ancient hunger awakening. The time of the harvest had come. The ground at the center of the clearing began to bulge and shift. Cracks appeared in the dry soil, wisps of foul-smelling vapor escaping, and then, with a sound like the world itself groaning in pain, it emerged. I cannot describe the horror that rose from the earth. It was darkness given form, hunger made manifest. Tendrils of shadow reached out, searching, grasping. Jessica's final scream was cut brutally short. When it was over, when the thing had sunk back into the earth to sleep and wait, a new scarecrow stood in the field. Its burlap face was stitched into an expression of eternal terror, its straw-filled body frozen in a pose of supplication. "Welcome, sister," Old Tom's voice intoned. "The harvest is complete." As the sun rose fully, bathing the world in golden light that now seemed obscene, I stood motionless on my post. My will was broken, my resistance crushed. I understood now the full horror of what I had become, of the role I would play in this eternal monstrous cycle. The harvest moon hung bloated and red in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the cornfield. I stood rigid on my post, a silent sentinel among the rustling stalks. But tonight was different. Tonight the air thrummed with an ancient power, a palpable sense of anticipation that set my straw-stuffed form trembling. One by one, the other scarecrows began to stir. They abandoned their posts, moving with unnatural grace through the corn. Old Tom's voice whispered in my mind, a dry rustling that sent shivers through my burlap skin. "It is time, Jack. The night of the great ritual is upon us. Come. Against my will, I felt my feet tear free from the earth. My joints creaked as I took my first stumbling steps, following the others deeper into the field. We emerged into a large clearing I had never seen before. At its center stood a crude stone altar, ancient and worn, its surface stained dark with what I feared was centuries of spilled blood. The scarecrows formed a circle around the altar, their stitched faces turned expectantly towards the far end of the clearing. I took my place among them, dread building within me. A commotion at the edge of the corn drew my attention. 2 scarecrows emerged, dragging a struggling figure between them. It was a man, middle-aged and terrified, his eyes wide with panic. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse from screaming. "Let me go. I don't understand what's happening." The scarecrows ignored his pleas, hauling him roughly to the altar. They forced him down, straw-stuffed hands holding him in place despite his struggles. A hush fell over the gathering as a figure emerged from the corn. It was Ezra, the old farmer who had tried to warn me what felt like a lifetime ago. But there was something different about him now. His movements were too fluid, his eyes too bright in the moonlight. "Brothers and sisters," Ezra called out, his voice carrying an authority I had never heard before. "We gather tonight to perform the sacred ritual, to renew our pact with the earth and ensure the continuation of the harvest." As he spoke, Ezra's appearance began to change. His skin seemed to ripple and shift, taking on the texture of weathered burlap. Straw poked out from beneath his clothing, and his eyes sank into hollow sockets filled with an eldritch light. "Behold," he intoned, gesturing to the terrified man on the altar, "the vessel through which our covenant shall be renewed." The man's struggles increased, his cries growing more desperate. "What are you? What do you want from me?" Ezra, or the thing that had been masquerading as Ezra, fixed the man with its glowing gaze. "We want what all beings want, dear child. We want to live, and you shall help us do so." With a gesture from Ezra, the ritual began. The scarecrows began to sway, a low, eerie chant rising from their stitched mouths. The very corn seemed to bend towards the altar, as if drawn by some unseen force. I watched in horror as tendrils of darkness began to seep from the earth, coiling around the altar and the screaming man upon it. They sank into his flesh, and his cries took on a new note of agony. Ezra raised his arms to the blood-red moon. "Great One, slumbering beneath the earth, we bring you this offering, that you may continue to grant us life beyond death, power beyond mortal comprehension." The ground began to tremble, and I felt a presence stirring deep below. Something ancient, something hungry, awakening to Ezra's call. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the man on the altar underwent a terrifying transformation. His skin hardened and split, revealing burlap beneath. Straw burst from his mouth, his eyes, every orifice. His screams became muffled, then silent, replaced by the dry rustle of corn husks. I wanted to look away, to block out the horror before me, but I had no eyelids to close. I could only watch as a new scarecrow was born in agony and terror. When it was done, when the newly made scarecrow stood on unsteady legs beside the altar, Ezra turned to address us all. "Behold the price of our immortality," he said, his voice filled with terrible joy. "Through sacrifice, we endure. Through death, we live eternally." He went on to explain the true nature of our existence. We were not mere scarecrows, but vessels for fragments of an ancient entity. Each ritual, each sacrifice, fed the slumbering thing beneath the earth and renewed our unholy animation. "We are its eyes and ears in the world of men," Ezra proclaimed. "Its lures, its hunters. Through us it feeds, and in return, we transcend the frail limits of humanity." As he spoke, I felt something shifting within me. The last remnants of my human self, the part that had clung so desperately to the name Jack and the memories of a life before the corn, began to fade. In its place rose a new awareness. I could feel the stirring of the earth beneath me, the subtle pulse of power flowing through every stalk of corn. The hunger of the Ancient One became my hunger, its purpose, my purpose. "Embrace it, Jack," Old Tom's voice whispered in my mind. "Let go of what you were. Become what you were meant to be." I tried to resist, to hold on to some shred of my former self, but with each passing moment, with each wave of power pulsing from the altar, I felt myself slipping away. The newly made scarecrow was led into the circle, taking its place among us. Its burlap face was blank, awaiting the imprint of its new purpose. Ezra approached it, placing a straw-filled hand on its shoulder. "Welcome, brother," he said. "What name shall you bear in your new life?" The scarecrow's stitched mouth moved, and a whisper emerged. "Thomas. I was Thomas." "No longer," Ezra replied. "From this night forward you shall be known as Harvest Moon, for you were born on this most sacred of nights." As Harvest Moon took its place in the circle, Ezra turned to address us all once more. "The ritual is complete, my brothers and sisters. Go forth into the world of men. Listen for those whose souls cry out for something more. Whisper to them of the power we possess, the freedom from death. Lure them to our fields that we may continue to feed our master and ensure our own existence." The scarecrows began to disperse, melting away into the corn. Soon only Ezra, Old Tom, and I remained in the clearing. Ezra fixed me with his glowing gaze. "You have witnessed the truth of our existence, Jack. The last of your human doubts should now be laid to rest. Embrace your new nature fully, for there is no returning to what you once were." As if his words were a key unlocking some final door within me, I felt the last traces of my humanity slip away. The corn whispered to me with 1,000 voices, sharing secrets of the earth and sky. I could feel the hunger of the Ancient One as if it were my own, could sense the life force of every living thing for miles around. I was no longer Jack, the writer who had stumbled into a nightmare. I was something else now, something both less and more than human. As I took my first steps away from the altar, back towards my assigned post in the field, I felt a sense of terrible purpose filling me. The harvest would continue. The Ancient One would feed. And I would play my part in this eternal, monstrous cycle. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. To human eyes, it might have been beautiful. But to my new senses, it was merely the beginning of another day of waiting, watching, and whispering to those who strayed too near the corn. The ritual was complete. The corn swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, golden stalks stretching as far as the eye could see. I stood motionless on my post, a silent sentinel in a sea of green and gold. Days, perhaps weeks, had passed since the ritual. Time held little meaning now, marked only by the rhythmic rise and fall of the sun and the constant gnawing hunger that consumed us all. A sound caught my attention. Footsteps, small and hesitant, crunching on the gravel path that wound past the field. I turned my gaze towards the source, my burlap face creaking with the motion. A child emerged from around the bend, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her face streaked with tears and grime. She stumbled as she walked, fatigue evident in every step. "Mommy," she called out, her voice small and frightened. "Daddy, where are you?" The hunger within me surged, an almost painful longing. Every fiber of my being screamed to call out to her, to whisper her name and draw her into the waiting corn. I could feel the others stirring, their attention focused on the lost child like predators scenting prey. Old Tom's voice slithered through my mind. "Call to her, Jack. Bring her to us. The master hungers and a child's soul burns so very bright." I felt my stitched mouth begin to move, the whisper building in whatever passed for my throat. But as I formed the words, something deep within me rebelled. A memory surfaced, hazy and distant, as if from another life. A little girl's laughter, the feel of small arms wrapped around my neck in a hug. I had been An uncle? A father? The details were maddeningly out of reach, but the emotion remained. Love, protectiveness, a desperate need to keep this child safe. No, I thought, struggling against the compulsion. Not her. Not a child. The others sensed my hesitation. Their whispers filled my mind, urging me on, demanding I fulfill my purpose. But that last flicker of humanity, that final shred of who I had once been, burned brighter than ever. The little girl drew closer, her eyes wide as she peered into the corn. Hello? Is anyone there? I'm lost. I can't find my parents. I felt my body tremble with the effort of resistance. The hunger clawed at me, demanding to be sated. But the memory of that long-ago child gave me strength. With every ounce of will I possessed, I forced my stitched mouth to move. But instead of a seductive whisper, I managed to croak out a warning. Run! The word emerged as a harsh, inhuman sound, more akin to the caw of a crow than a human voice. Run away! Danger! The little girl stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear. Who said that? Run! I managed again, fighting against the others who were trying to silence me. Not safe. Go! She didn't need to be told a third time. With a small scream, the child turned and fled back down the path, her little legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. As her footsteps faded into the distance, I felt the wrath of the others bearing down on me. Their anger was a palpable force pressing in from all sides. Old Tom's voice cut through the cacophony, cold and furious. You dare defy the will of the master? You would deny us our rightful prey? I sagged on my post, drained by the effort of my rebellion. She was just a child, I thought back at them. Innocent. I couldn't. I won't be part of hurting children. A harsh laugh echoed through my mind. Ezra's voice, tinged with cruel amusement. Still clinging to your human morality, Jack? How disappointing. I had such high hopes for you. The corn around me began to rustle ominously. I saw other scarecrows emerging from between the rows, their burlap faces twisted into expressions of rage and hunger. You've forgotten your purpose, Ezra continued. Perhaps you need a reminder of the consequences of defiance. 2 scarecrows seized me, their straw-filled hands surprisingly strong as they wrenched me from my post. I tried to struggle, but my strength was spent. They dragged me deeper into the field, to a small clearing I had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a strange apparatus. It looked like a crude frame assembled from broken farm equipment and tangles of barbed wire. As the scarecrows forced me towards it, I realized with growing horror what it was for. No, I thought, trying to dig my heels into the earth. Please don't do this. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. They lashed me to the frame with loops of barbed wire, the rusted barbs digging into my burlap flesh. I felt no pain. This body was incapable of such sensation. But the violation of it sent waves of revulsion through me. Ezra approached, his form flickering between that of the kindly old farmer and the monstrous scarecrow thing I now knew him to be. You disappoint me, Jack, he said, his voice heavy with false sadness. I had such hopes for you, but it seems some human weakness still lingers within you. We'll have to burn it out. He produced a lantern, its flame flickering with an unnatural green light. This fire is sacred to our master, Ezra explained. It burns away doubt, burns away humanity. When it's done, you'll be reborn, pure, dedicated, one of us in truth as well as form. I tried to speak, to beg or reason with him, but no sound emerged from my stitched mouth. Ezra brought the lantern closer, and I felt the heat of its flames licking at my straw-filled body. Burn away the last of your human self, Jack, Ezra intoned. Embrace your true nature. Become one with the harvest. As the flames touched me, agony unlike anything I had ever experienced seared through my being. I screamed silently, thrashing against my bonds. Images flashed through my mind. Memories of my human life, faces of people I had once loved, hopes and dreams now lost forever. The other scarecrows gathered around, swaying and chanting in that strange, sibilant language I still didn't understand. Their voices rose and fell, a haunting melody that seemed to feed the unnatural fire consuming me. I don't know how long the torment lasted. Time lost all meaning in that haze of pain and green fire. But eventually, mercifully, darkness claimed me. When awareness returned, I found myself back on my post at the edge of the field. My burlap body showed no signs of the fire, no evidence of the torture I had endured. But inside I felt different, hollowed out. The last embers of my humanity had been all but extinguished. As the sun set and the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I stood silent vigil over the cornfield. The hunger within me burned stronger than ever, my purpose clear and unambiguous. I was a harvester now, a true servant of the Ancient One that slumbered beneath the earth, and the next lost soul to wander near my field would not be so fortunate as that little girl. As night fell and the corn whispered its secrets, I waited. The harvest would come. The harvest moon hung low in the sky, bathing the cornfield in an eerie amber glow. I stood motionless on my post, my burlap skin crawling with an unnatural tension. The night air was thick with malevolence, and I could feel the others stirring, their rage palpable even from a distance. They were coming for me. I had broken the most sacred rule of our twisted brotherhood. I had denied the Ancient One its prey, had allowed a soul to escape the harvest, and now I would pay the price. The corn parted, and they emerged, a nightmarish procession of scarecrows, their stitched faces contorted with hunger and fury. Old Tom led the charge, his weathered burlap visage a mask of cold determination. "Traitor," he hissed, the word carried on a wind that reeked of decay. "You have forsaken your purpose, denied your very nature. For this, you must be unmade." I wanted to run, to flee into the night and never look back. But my legs remained rooted to the spot, my joints frozen and unyielding. All I could do was watch as they surrounded me, their straw-filled hands reaching out with cruel intent. "Wait," I tried to say, but my stitched mouth refused to form the words. "Please, you don't understand." But there was no reasoning with them, no appeal to a humanity long since burned away. They fell upon me like a pack of feral beasts, tearing at my burlap flesh with surprising strength. Pain exploded through my being as they ripped me apart, straw spilling from the tears in my skin like blood. I felt my arms being wrenched from their sockets, my legs torn away, and yet beneath the agony I felt something else, a strange sense of relief, of freedom. As my consciousness began to fade, the world around me shifting and blurring, I saw something that made my non-existent heart leap. There, at the edge of the field, stood the little girl I had saved, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, a group of adults wielding torches and farm tools advanced cautiously into the corn. "It's true, Daddy," I heard the child cry out. "The scarecrows are alive. They tried to hurt me, but one of them warned me to run away." Her father, a burly man with a grim expression, hefted a pitchfork. "I don't know what kind of devil's work is going on here, but it ends tonight." The scarecrows, so intent on my destruction, didn't notice the approaching humans until it was too late. The first torch arced through the air, landing in a dry patch of corn. Flames erupted instantly, racing along the rows with terrifying speed. Panic rippled through the gathered scarecrows. They abandoned their assault on me, turning to flee deeper into the field. But the humans had come prepared, spreading out to encircle the cornfield and set fires at strategic points. As the inferno grew, I felt a strange sensation overtaking me. My broken, scattered form began to dissolve, turning to ash that was quickly caught up in the rising smoke. But instead of fear, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. In my last moments of awareness, I saw old Tom stumbling through the flames, his burlap body alight. His stitched eyes met mine, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of something almost human. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. "What have you done, Jack?" he croaked, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the fire. "You've doomed us all." But as I watched him crumble to ash, I realized the truth. I hadn't doomed them. I had freed them. Freed us all from an eternity of servitude to a monstrous, insatiable entity. The fire raged on, consuming everything in its path. I saw Ezra emerge from his farmhouse, his human disguise sloughing away to reveal the abomination beneath. He howled in fury and despair as the flames engulfed him, taking with him the last vestige of the dark power that had held sway over this land for so long. As my consciousness faded, dissolving like mist in the morning sun, I felt the earth beneath the field shudder. A great unearthly shriek rose from deep below, a sound of ancient hunger denied and unholy power undone. The curse was breaking. In those final moments, I saw flashes of the countless lives that would now be spared. Children who would grow to adulthood, families that would remain whole, souls that would not be sacrificed to feed an eldritch abomination. My last act of humanity, that desperate warning to a lost child, had set in motion the end of the harvest, and though I would not live to see it, I knew that with the coming of dawn this cornfield would be nothing more than a blackened ruin, its dark secrets burned away, its power broken forever. As the last spark of my awareness winked out, carried away on the smoke-laden wind, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that fateful day I first set foot in this accursed field. I felt at peace. The fire raged on through the night, its hungry flames devouring decades of dark history. The townspeople worked tirelessly to keep it contained, to prevent it from spreading beyond the boundaries of the cornfield. And as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the last of the flames sputtered and died. Where once stood a vast field of corn, now there was only ash and scorched earth. The old farmhouse, Ezra's lair, was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. And of the scarecrows, those terrifying sentinels that had stood watch for so long, there was no trace to be found. The little girl, her face smudged with soot but her eyes bright with relief, tugged at her father's sleeve. "Is it over, Daddy? Are the bad scarecrows gone?" Her father knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Yes, sweetheart. They're gone. And they won't ever hurt anyone again." As the townspeople began to disperse, murmuring in low voices about the strange events of the night, a gentle breeze swept across the blackened field. It carried with it the faintest whisper, barely audible but unmistakably there. "Thank you." And with that final farewell, the last remnant of the being once known as Jack dissipated, free at last from the nightmare that had claimed him. The harvest was ended, the ancient hunger silenced, and a terrible chapter in the town's history closed forever. In the years to come, the field would remain barren, a stark reminder of the evil that had once taken root there. But around its edges, wildflowers would bloom and birdsong would fill the air, nature reclaiming what had once been corrupted, life persisting in the face of darkness. And on quiet nights, when the harvest moon hung low in the sky, the townspeople would tell the story of the scarecrow who saved a little girl, and in doing so, saved them all. The woods have always been my sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world fades away, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft crunch of earth beneath my feet. But on that fateful day, as the October sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I found something that would shatter my peace forever. I remember the chill in the air, the way my breath fogged in front of me as I trudged along the familiar path. The fallen leaves, a tapestry of reds and golds, whispered secrets as I passed. It was then that I saw it, a glint of something unnatural among the forest debris. Curious, I knelt down, brushing aside the leaves to reveal a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the once rich brown now faded and cracked with age. A tingle ran down my spine as I lifted it, feeling the weight of unknown stories in my hands. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. Did someone lose this? Silence was my only answer, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. I should have left it there, Should have placed it back on the ground and continued my hike. But the writer in me, the part that always hungered for a good story, couldn't resist. With a quick glance around to ensure I was alone, I opened the journal. The first page was blank, save for a single line written in an elegant, flowing script. To whom it may concern, these are the thoughts I dare not speak aloud. A shiver ran through me, both from the cool air and the ominous words. I turned the page and my eyes widened as I began to read. September 15th. I saw her again today, the waitress from the diner. She smiled at me, not knowing the thoughts that ran through my head. Oh, the things I could do to that pretty little neck of hers. My stomach churned, but I couldn't stop reading. Page after page detailed dark fantasies and twisted desires. The author described in vivid, sickening detail how they longed to hear the screams of their victims, to feel life drain from their bodies. As the sun dipped lower, casting the forest in an eerie twilight, I found myself sinking to the ground, my back against a gnarled old oak. The journal shook in my trembling hands as I continued to read. October 1st. The baker's son has such delicate hands. I wonder how they'd look. Severed and arranged on a platter. Jesus Christ, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Who the hell wrote this? I should have stopped. Should have closed the book and run straight to the police. But something compelled me to keep going, to delve deeper into this stranger's depraved mind. As I neared the end of the journal, the entries became more recent. And then, I saw it. My name, jumping out from the page like a jack-in-the-box. October 10th. I found my next subject. John Thorne, the writer who lives on Maple Street. He thinks he's safe in his little house tapping away at his keyboard. He has no idea what's coming. My blood ran cold. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. How did this person know my name, my address? A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I whirled around, nearly dropping the journal in my panic. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Show yourself!" Only the wind answered, rustling through the trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in the gathering darkness a pair of eyes were fixed on me. I scrambled to my feet, shoving the journal into my backpack. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a flash of movement between the trees. "Hello?" I called again, taking a hesitant step forward. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, softly at first but growing louder, a chuckle. It started low, almost beneath the range of hearing, then built to a maniacal laugh that echoed through the woods. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, the path long forgotten in my panic. The laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, always just behind me, urging me faster. I burst out of the tree line, gasping for air, my legs burning from the effort. The streetlights of my neighborhood had never been a more welcome sight. But even as I slowed to a walk, trying to catch my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into my back. At my front door, I fumbled with my keys, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The street was empty, peaceful even, but I knew better. Something had followed me home. Once inside, I locked the door, then checked it again. And again. I drew all the curtains, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the task. In the silence of my living room, I pulled out the journal once more. Its innocuous appearance belied the horrors within. I opened it to the last entry, the one that bore my name, and read the final lines. "He thinks he's safe now, locked away in his house. But I'm already inside, John. I'm in your head, and I'm never leaving." I let out a strangled laugh, bordering on hysteria. "This can't be happening," I muttered to myself. "It's just some sick joke, it has to be." But as I looked up, catching my reflection in the window, I saw a shadow move behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but found only an empty room. The journal lay open on the coffee table, a silent testament to the terror that had followed me home. And as the night deepened outside, I realized with growing dread, that my sanctuary was gone. The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m., its red digits casting an eerie glow across my bedroom. I rolled over for what felt like the 100th time, my sheets tangled around my legs, damp with cold sweat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words from that damn journal, etched into my eyelids like a twisted tattoo. He thinks he's safe now, locked away in his house, but I'm already inside, John. I'm in your head and I'm never leaving. I sat up, running a shaky hand through my hair. The room felt too small, the shadows in the corners too deep. I could have sworn I saw movement in them, a darker patch of black shifting and writhing. Get a grip, John, I muttered to myself. It's just your imagination. But was it? The journal lay on my dresser, innocent looking in the dim light. I'd brought it into my home, into my sanctuary. What if I'd invited something else in with it? A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. I froze, straining my ears. The sound didn't repeat, but now that I was listening, the silence seemed alive, pregnant with menace. Hello, I called out, hating how weak my voice sounded. Is someone there? Only silence answered, but it felt like a mocking silence, as if something was out there, laughing at my fear. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As the first rays of dawn crept through my window, I finally allowed myself to relax. Sunlight chased away the shadows, and with them, some of my paranoia. I chuckled weakly, feeling foolish for my night terrors. Coffee, I mumbled. I need coffee. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. And then I saw them, muddy footprints. They led from my bedroom window to the foot of my bed, adult-sized, clearly defined in the morning light. My breath caught in my throat as I followed their path with my eyes. They stopped right where I was sitting. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet as I backed away from the evidence of my midnight visitor. My hand fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police, when a thought stopped me cold. What would I tell them? That I found a creepy journal in the woods and now someone was stalking me? That there were muddy footprints in my room that just appeared overnight? They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Okay, John, I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. Think this through. There has to be a logical explanation. But as I stared at those muddy prints, a chill ran down my spine. I knew, deep in my gut, that this was real. Someone had been in my room last night, watching me sleep. I couldn't face work. Not today. Not with this madness unfolding around me. I called in sick, my voice shaky as I spoke to my editor. Everything okay, John? She asked, concern evident in her tone. You sound awful. Just a bad bug, I lied. I should be fine in a day or two. All right, take care of yourself. And don't forget, I need that manuscript by next week. I hung up, guilt mingling with my fear. The manuscript, my next book. It all seemed so trivial now, with a stalker on my tail and a journal full of nightmares on my dresser. The journal. I turned to look at it, sitting there innocently in the morning light. It held answers, I was sure of it. Clues to who was doing this to me, and why. I spent the next several hours poring over every page, every word. I made notes, drew connections, tried to decipher any hidden meanings in the ramblings of a madman. The sun climbed higher in the sky, then began its descent. And still, I read. There has to be something, I muttered, flipping back to an earlier entry. Some clue I'm missing. As I turned the page, something fluttered to the floor. I reached down to pick it up and my blood turned to ice in my veins. It was a photograph. Of me. Sleeping in my bed. Taken last night. The angle was all wrong. It had to have been taken from above, as if the photographer was hovering over my bed. In the photo, my face was peaceful, unaware of the danger literally hanging over me. Oh, God, I choked out, the photo slipping from my numb fingers. I slammed the journal shut, suddenly unable to look at it anymore. This was real. All of it. The journal, the footprints, the feeling of being watched. Someone was toying with me, playing a sick game that I didn't understand. As if on cue, a shadow passed by my window. I leapt to my feet, knocking over my chair in my haste. I rushed to the window, yanking the curtains aside, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. There was nothing there. Just the fading light of day, the quiet street beyond, but I knew what I'd seen. That shadow had been real. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and frustration. "What do you want from me?" Only the encroaching evening answered, shadows lengthening across my yard like grasping fingers. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, the journal clutched to my chest like a shield. Night was falling, and with it came the crushing realization. I couldn't stay here. This house, once my refuge, had become a trap. The sanctity of my home had been violated, and nowhere felt safe anymore. As darkness settled over the world outside, I made a decision. I had to leave, had to get away from here, away from the watchful eyes that seemed to follow my every move. But even as I began to pack a bag, throwing clothes haphazardly into a duffel, a voice in the back of my mind whispered a chilling truth. "You can run, John, but you can't hide. Not from me. I'm already inside you." I zipped up the bag, the journal tucked safely inside. Whatever this was, wherever I went, I knew one thing for certain. My sleepless nights were far from over. They were just beginning. The gentle whir of the newly installed security cameras was meant to be comforting, but instead, it only served to heighten my sense of unease. I sat in my living room, surrounded by monitors displaying every angle of my property, my eyes darting from screen to screen, searching for any sign of movement. A branch tapped against the window, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Get it together, John," I muttered to myself, wiping cold sweat from my brow. "You're safe now. No one can get in without you knowing." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. The cameras, the locks, the barricaded windows, they were just an illusion of safety. Whoever was behind this, whoever wrote that journal, they were already inside my head. I turned my attention back to the cursed diary, spread open on the coffee table. I'd read it cover to cover at least a dozen times now, each reading revealing new horrors, new connections, and names. So many names. Sarah Jenkins, the florist, always surrounded by beauty, never knowing how close she is to decay. Officer Mike Holloway, he thinks his badge protects him, how wrong he is. Little Timmy Blake, such an innocent soul, it would be a shame if something were to happen to him. My stomach churned as I recognized each name. These weren't just random people, they were my neighbors, my friends, people I saw every day. And according to this twisted diary, they were all potential victims. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I had to warn them, protect them somehow. But how could I explain? "Hey, I found this creepy journal in the woods, and it says you might be murdered." They'd think I was insane. No, I had to be smart about this. Subtle. I'd watch them from afar, keep an eye out for anything suspicious. I'd be their unseen guardian angel. I decided to start with Sarah Jenkins. The florist shop was just a few blocks away, and her routine was predictable. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, she'd unlock the doors, flip the closed sign to open, and start arranging the outdoor displays. The next morning I was there, parked across the street in my beat-up Honda, a newspaper held up to cover my face. I watched as Sarah went about her morning routine, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of a threat. Hours passed. Sarah helped customers, made deliveries, watered her plants. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. As closing time approached, I began to feel foolish. What was I doing here? Stalking an innocent woman based on the ramblings of a madman? Just as I was about to start my car and leave, I saw him. A man in a dark hoodie, lurking at the corner, his eyes fixed on the flower shop. My heart raced. This was it. the threat I'd been waiting for. Without thinking, I leapt out of my car and rushed across the street. The man saw me coming and turned to run, but I was faster. I tackled him to the ground, pinning him beneath me. "Who are you?" I shouted, shaking him. "What do you want with Sarah?" "Get off me, you lunatic," the man yelled back, struggling against my grip. "Sarah! Sarah! Help!" To my shock, I heard the florist's voice behind me. "John? John Thorne? What on earth are you doing?" I turned to see Sarah standing there, her face a mask of confusion and fear. And then I looked down at the man I had tackled. The hood had fallen back, revealing a familiar face. It was Sarah's husband, Mark. "Oh, God," I muttered, scrambling off him. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I saw you watching the shop and I—" "You thought what?" Mark demanded, getting to his feet and brushing himself off. "That I was some kind of criminal. I was waiting to surprise my wife and take her to dinner." Sarah stepped between us, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. "John, what's going on? Why were you watching my shop?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain this? How could I make them understand that I was trying to protect them? I can't," I stammered, backing away. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake." I turned and ran, ignoring their calls behind me. I ran all the way home, my lungs burning, shame and confusion warring in my mind. As I approached my house, panting and sweating, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door was slightly ajar. I know I locked it. I always lock it. My heart pounding in my ears, I crept up to the door, pushing it open slowly. The house was dark, silent, but something felt off. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered me, but it felt like a living thing, watching, waiting. I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the entryway with harsh fluorescent light. Everything looked normal. No sign of forced entry, nothing out of place. And yet, I moved through the house, checking every room, every closet, under every bed. Nothing. No intruder, no sign that anyone had been here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That while I was out playing detective, someone, or something, had been here. I collapsed onto my couch, my head in my hands. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? The lines between reality and paranoia were blurring, and I no longer knew what to believe. The security camera monitors flickered in the corner, showing empty rooms and quiet hallways. But now, instead of comfort, they only served to remind me of how alone I was, how isolated I had become. I picked up the journal again, its leather cover cool against my sweating palms. This was the source of it all. This book had turned my life upside down, had made me suspect my friends, had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. "What are you?" I whispered to the journal. "What do you want from me?" As if in response, a gust of wind blew through the open front door, ruffling the pages of the journal. They settled on an entry I hadn't noticed before. "The writer thinks he's clever, thinks he can outsmart me, protect the others. But he's only digging himself deeper. Soon, he'll have no one left to turn to. No one but me." I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. This was madness. All of it. I had to end this. Had to get rid of the journal. Had to. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, my eyes darting to the security monitors. All the upstairs cameras showed empty rooms. But I knew what I had heard. Slowly, I rose from the couch. The journal clutched to my chest like a shield. With trembling steps, I made my way to the stairs, each creak of the floorboards under my feet sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm armed, and I've called the police." Lies, of course. I had no weapon, and my phone lay forgotten on the coffee table downstairs. But maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to scare off any intruder. As I reached the top of the stairs, a shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Just a flicker, there and gone in an instant. But it was enough. I wasn't alone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone was in my house. Someone had been here while I was gone, had waited for me to return, and now they were toying with me, playing a sick game of cat and mouse. I backed down the stairs, my eyes never leaving the top of the staircase. My mind raced, trying to form a plan. I needed to get out, to call for help. But the front door seemed miles away, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I wouldn't make it. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, my back hit the wall. I was cornered, trapped in my own home. The journal in my hands seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and I knew somehow that it was the key to all of this. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and desperation. "Why are you doing this to me?" From upstairs I heard a chuckle. Low, menacing, and horrifyingly familiar. It was my own laugh, echoing through the empty halls of my home. And then, in a voice that was mine but not mine, came the answer I had been dreading. "I want you, John. I want everything you are, everything you will be. And I'm going to take it, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but me." The lights went out, plunging me into darkness. And as I stood there paralyzed with fear, I realized that the true horror was just beginning. The paranoia that had been building, the fear that had been growing, they were nothing compared to what was coming, because the enemy wasn't out there in the darkness. The morning light filtered through my curtains, a mockery of normalcy after the terror of the night before. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside had me jumping, expecting to see my own twisted reflection grinning back at me from the shadows. I dragged myself out of bed, my body aching from the tension that had kept me rigid all night. Coffee. I needed coffee. And then I'd figure out what to do next. As I shuffled towards the front door to retrieve the morning paper, something caught my eye. A small white square affixed to the door. My heart rate instantly spiked, memories of last night's encounter flooding back. With trembling fingers, I plucked the note from the door. The message, written in an eerily familiar handwriting, sent a chill down my spine. "Stop reading what isn't yours." I stumbled back, the note fluttering from my grasp. They had been here. While I cowered inside, they had come right up to my door. The implications were terrifying. "This has to stop," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "I can't keep living like this." My eyes fell on the journal sitting innocuously on the coffee table where I'd left it. The source of all my troubles. Maybe if I got rid of it, if I handed it over to the authorities, this nightmare would end. Decision made. I snatched up the journal and my car keys. The police station wasn't far. They'd know what to do. They had to. The drive was a blur of paranoia, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see a car following me. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just another beautiful day in our quiet town. At the station, I approached the desk sergeant, the journal clutched tightly to my chest. "Can I help you, sir?" the officer asked, eyeing me warily. I must have looked a sight, unshaven, wild-eyed, clutching a battered old book like it was a lifeline. "Yes, I need to report a crime. Or a potential crime. I'm not sure." The words tumbled out, jumbled and incoherent. I took a deep breath and tried again. "I found this journal in the woods. It's full of terrible things. Plans to hurt people. And I think someone's been stalking me because of it." The sergeant's expression shifted from wariness to skepticism. "All right, sir. Why don't you have a seat and tell me everything from the beginning?" For the next hour, I poured out my story. The discovery in the woods, the footprints in my room, the photo of me sleeping, the voice in my house. With each word, I could see the disbelief growing in the officer's eyes. When I finished, silence hung in the air for a long moment. Finally, the sergeant spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Mr. Thorne, I understand you're upset, but you have to realize how this sounds. You're a writer, correct? Is it possible that your imagination is getting the better of you? No, I protested, my voice rising. It's real, all of it. Just read the journal, you'll see. I thrust the book towards him, but he made no move to take it. Sir, we can't go around investigating every strange book someone finds. There's no evidence of any crime here. My advice, get some rest. Maybe talk to someone, a professional. Stress can do funny things to a person's mind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were dismissing me, treating me like I was crazy. You don't understand, I pleaded. People could die, I could die. But it was useless. The sergeant had already made up his mind. With a pat on my shoulder and a promise to keep an eye out, he ushered me out of the station. I stood on the steps, the sun too bright, the world too normal. How could everything just go on when my life was falling apart? As I made my way back to my car, a flash of movement caught my eye. A figure in a dark jacket, just like the one described in the journal. My heart leapt into my throat. Without thinking, I took off after them. The figure, sensing my pursuit, began to run. We weaved through the crowded streets, dodging pedestrians and leaping over obstacles. Wait, I shouted. I just want to talk. But the figure showed no signs of slowing. We turned down a narrow alley, then another. I was gaining ground, my desperation lending me speed. Just as I thought I might catch up, we burst out onto a busy street. The figure darted into a crowd of shoppers, and just like that, they were gone. I spun in circles trying to catch a glimpse of the dark jacket, but it was useless. They had vanished as if they'd never been there at all. Defeated and gasping for breath, I slumped against a nearby wall. Had it all been in my imagination? Was the sergeant right? Was I losing my mind? With shaking hands, I opened the journal. Maybe there was something I'd missed, some clue that would make sense of all this. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. There, in fresh ink, was a new entry. The fool thinks he can catch me, chasing shadows through the streets like a dog after a car. He'll never understand. I'm always one step ahead, always watching, always waiting. I snapped the book shut, my mind reeling. This was impossible. I'd had the journal with me the whole time. There was no way anyone could have written in it. Unless... The thought was too terrible to contemplate. Was I writing these entries myself? Was some part of me, some hidden personality, responsible for all of this? I stumbled back to my car, the journal feeling like a lead weight in my hands. The drive home was a daze, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. As I pulled into my driveway, a thought struck me. The cameras. I'd installed security cameras all around my house. If someone had been here, if they'd left that note on my door, I'd have proof. I rushed inside, making a beeline for the monitors. With trembling fingers, I rewound the footage to last night. Hours passed in fast forward. Nothing. No movement. No mysterious figures. Just the empty porch, the undisturbed door. And then, at 3:17 a.m., a glitch. The screen went to static for a split second. When the image returned, the note was there, pinned to the door. I rewound and played it again. And again. There was no mistaking it. One moment, empty door. Static. Then the note. This isn't possible, I whispered to the empty room. But the evidence was right there in front of me. Someone or something had bypassed my security system, had appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. I sank to the floor, the journal clutched to my chest. The warning on my door echoed in my mind. Stop reading what isn't yours. But I was in too deep now. Whatever this was, whatever was happening to me, I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth felt so close, yet so terrifyingly out of reach. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across my living room, I made a decision. I would get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. I would find out who, or what, was behind this journal, behind the stalking, behind the impossible events unfolding around me, even if it meant losing myself in the process. I opened the journal once more, pen in hand. If I was writing these entries in some fugue state, then perhaps I could communicate with whatever it was. With a deep breath, I began to write, "I know you're there. I know you're watching. What do you want from me?" I stared at the words, half expecting them to change before my eyes, but they remained stubbornly static, my own handwriting staring back at me. Just as I was about to close the book, resigned to another sleepless night of paranoia and questions, the pen in my hand began to move of its own accord. In a script that was mine but not mine, words began to form on the page. "Everything, John. I want everything." The world had taken on a surreal quality, as if I were walking through a dream, or nightmare, of my own making. Everywhere I looked, I saw echoes of the journal's dark prophecies. The park bench where old Mr. Johnson fed the pigeons every morning was no longer just a pleasant scene of small-town life. Now I couldn't help but recall the diary's chilling words. The pigeons gather around him like vultures, sensing the approaching end. I found myself watching Mr. Johnson closely, searching for any sign of illness or distress. Even the local diner, usually a haven of comfort food and friendly faces, had become tainted. As I stirred my coffee, my eyes kept drifting to Sally, the cheerful waitress. The journal's description haunted me. Her smile hides secrets darker than the coffee she serves. I was losing my grip on reality, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop. The journal had become my lens to the world, and through it, everything was sinister, laden with hidden meanings and dark portents. It was in this state of paranoid hyper-awareness that I ran into Mike, an old friend from high school. Under normal circumstances, I would have been glad for the distraction, the chance to ground myself in the familiar. But these were far from normal circumstances. "John," Mike called out, waving as he approached. "Long time no see, buddy. How have you been?" I forced a smile, trying to act normal. "Hey, Mike. I'm doing okay. How about you?" As we chatted, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mike's smile seemed strained, his eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. When there was a lull in the conversation, I decided to take a risk. "Hey, Mike," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You haven't noticed anything strange around town lately, have you? Or heard about any weird, I don't know, journals or anything?" The change was instantaneous. Mike's face paled, and he suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. "Journals? No, nothing like that. Look, John, I've got to run. It was great seeing you, though." Before I could say another word, Mike was gone, practically jogging down the street. His reaction only confirmed my suspicions. He knew something. Without thinking, I began to follow him. I kept my distance, ducking behind corners and pretending to window shop whenever he glanced back. Mike led me through winding streets, eventually arriving at the old community center on the edge of town. I watched from across the street as Mike entered the building, glancing furtively over his shoulder before slipping inside. My heart was pounding. What was going on in there? Moving as quietly as I could, I crept up to the building. Most of the windows were dark, but a faint light spilled from one on the ground floor. I inched closer, straining to hear. Voices drifted out, muffled but audible. I recognized some of them: Mrs. Peterson, my third-grade teacher, Chief Wallace from the fire department, even Mayor Thompson. What were they all doing here? "Can't keep this up much longer," someone was saying. It sounded like Mrs. Peterson. "He's starting to notice things." "We don't have a choice," another voice replied. Chief Wallace, I thought. "We have to stick to the plan for all our sakes." My breath caught in my throat. The plan. They were talking about me. Mayor Thompson's voice cut through the murmurs. "Remember why we're doing this, people. If we falter now, everything we've worked for will be for nothing. We have to keep John in the dark, at least for a little while longer." I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. These were people I'd known my whole life, people I trusted. And they were... what? Conspiring against me? A twig snapped under my foot, and the voices inside immediately hushed. Did you hear that? Someone whispered. Check outside, another voice commanded. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, not caring about the noise I was making now. I had to get away, had to get home where it was safe. Behind me, I heard the community center's door open, voices calling out. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until the familiar sight of my house came into view. I fumbled with my keys, practically falling through the door before slamming it shut behind me. Safe. I was safe. But was I? If what I'd heard was true, if the whole town was in on whatever this was anywhere really safe? I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what I'd just witnessed. The journal lay on the coffee table where I'd left it, seeming to mock me with its presence. With shaking hands, I picked it up and opened it. There, on a previously blank page, new words had appeared. The pieces are falling into place. Soon, John, you'll understand. But will you be ready for the truth? I threw the book across the room with a cry of frustration. What truth? I shouted at the empty house. What the hell is going on? Only silence answered me. I buried my face in my hands, feeling the last threads of my sanity starting to unravel. Everyone I knew, everyone I trusted, they were all part of this. But part of what? The plan. Keeping me in the dark. But why? What could be so important, so secret, that it required the entire town's cooperation? I thought back over the past few weeks, trying to pinpoint when things had started to go wrong. It all came back to the journal. Finding it in the woods that day had set everything in motion. Or had it? Was the journal just a symptom of something larger? Something that had been in play long before I stumbled upon it? A thought struck me then, so terrible that it made my blood run cold. What if I was the one behind all this? What if this elaborate conspiracy was all in my head, some sort of mental breakdown manifesting as a town-wide plot? But no, that couldn't be right. I'd seen them at the community center. I'd heard them talking about me. That was real, wasn't it? I stood up on shaky legs, moving to retrieve the journal from where I'd thrown it. As I picked it up, a small piece of paper fluttered out, a photograph. With trembling fingers, I turned it over. It was a picture of me standing outside the community center, peering in through the window. It had been taken tonight, mere hours ago. On the back, written in that now familiar handwriting, was a message. Curiosity killed the cat, John. How many lives do you think you have left? A sob escaped me, equal parts fear and frustration. I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Everyone was suspect. Every friendly face could be hiding dark secrets. Even my own mind couldn't be trusted. I sank onto the couch, the journal clutched to my chest like a lifeline. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing that had started this madness was now the only thing I felt I could trust. As the night deepened outside, I sat there, paralyzed by indecision. What could I do? Where could I go? If the entire town was in on this conspiracy, there was nowhere safe for me. But I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever plan they had to unfold. I had to do something. I had to fight back. With a newfound determination, I opened the journal once more. If this book was truly connected to whatever was happening, then maybe, just maybe, it held the key to unraveling this mystery. I began to read, poring over every entry, searching for clues I might have missed before. As I read, a pattern began to emerge. Certain phrases repeated, certain names appeared more frequently than others, and then I saw it. A name I hadn't noticed before, hidden in the seemingly random ramblings. A name that made my heart skip a beat. My own name, written in a code I hadn't recognized until now. With shaking hands, I began to decode the hidden message, my mind racing with the implications. Whatever secrets this journal held, whatever truth lay at the heart of this conspiracy, I was somehow at the center of it all. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my windows, I finally decoded the last of the hidden message. The truth in all its terrifying glory lay before me. The woods loomed before me, dark and foreboding in the fading twilight. I clutched the journal tightly, its pages opened to the entry that had led me here. The words seemed to writhe on the page, a mix of dread and anticipation coursing through my veins as I read them again. When the moon hangs full and heavy in the sky, they will gather in the heart of the forest. The clearing where it all began will become the stage for the final act. And John, poor, unsuspecting John, will be the guest of honor. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Part of me wanted to turn back, to run home and pretend I'd never read those words. But I knew I couldn't. Whatever was happening, whatever this ritual was, I had to see it for myself. I had to know the truth. Steeling my nerves, I plunged into the woods. The path was familiar. I'd walked it countless times before finding the journal, but now, every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential attacker. As I neared the clearing, I slowed my pace, moving as quietly as possible. I found a dense patch of bushes near the edge and crouched down, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. At first, the clearing was empty, bathed in silvery moonlight. Then, almost imperceptibly, shapes began to emerge from the surrounding darkness. Hooded figures, moving with an eerie silence, filed into the clearing one by one. I counted them as they entered. 5, 10, 15. By the time they stopped coming, there were at least 30 figures standing in a circle. My mind raced. There couldn't be that many people involved, could there? As if in answer to my unspoken question, one of the figures spoke. The voice, muffled by the hood but still recognizable, sent a chill down my spine. It was Mrs. Johnson, my kindly next-door neighbor. "Are we all here?" she asked, her normally warm voice now cold and commanding. "All except the guest of honor," another voice replied. This one I recognized too. Mr. Patel, who ran the local grocery store. Guest of honor. The words from the journal echoed in my mind. They were talking about me. The figures began to move, forming a tighter circle. From my hiding spot, I could see something in the center, a stone altar of some kind, rough-hewn and ancient-looking. How long had that been here? One of the taller figures stepped forward, raising their arms. When they spoke, I had to stifle a gasp. It was Mayor Thompson. "Brothers and sisters," he intoned, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "We gather here, as our ancestors have for generations, to perform the sacred rite. The time has come for renewal, for the passing of the mantle." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. I strained to hear their words, catching snippets of conversation. "Been so long. Is he ready? What if he refuses?" Mayor Thompson raised his hands again, silencing the whispers. "I know many of you have doubts. John has been resistant to our guidance. But the signs are clear. The journal has awoken, and John has followed its path. Whether he knows it or not, he is here." I felt my blood run cold. How did they know I was here? Had they seen me? But no, they were still looking around, searching the woods. "John!" Mayor Thompson called out. "We know you're watching. It's time to fulfill your destiny. Come forth and take your place among us." The assembled figures took up the call, their voices rising in a chant that made my skin crawl. "John, John, John." I pressed myself further into the bushes, my mind reeling. What destiny? What did they want from me? The chanting grew louder, more insistent. I could feel something building in the air, a pressure that made my ears pop and my vision blur. The moonlight seemed to intensify, focusing on the stone altar at the center of the clearing. And then, to my horror, I saw something beginning to form above the altar. A shape, hazy and indistinct at first, but slowly solidifying. It was a face, my face, but twisted and wrong, with eyes that glowed with an inner fire. "No," I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. "This can't be real." But even as I denied it, I knew in my heart that it was. Everything, the journal, the conspiracy, the ritual, it was all real, and I was at the center of it all. Fear finally overcame my curiosity. I had to get out of here, had to run, had to escape whatever madness this was. I turned, ready to flee back through the woods, only to find my path blocked. A figure stood there, hooded like the others, but somehow different. Taller, more imposing. And in their hand, they held a book, a journal identical to the one I clutched in my trembling fingers. Slowly, deliberately, the figure reached up and lowered their hood. I found myself staring into a face I knew all too well. My own face, but older, lined with years I hadn't yet lived, eyes glinting with knowledge I didn't yet possess. "Hello, John," my older self said, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." I stumbled backward, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. What? How is this possible? How is... The other John, the author of the journal, stepped forward, his movements fluid and purposeful. "I know you have questions, so many questions. I did too, when I stood where you're standing now." "I don't understand," I managed to choke out. "The journal, the ritual, all of it. What does it mean?" My older self sighed, a sound heavy with years of burden. "It means, John, that our time has come, just as it came for me, and for the John before me, and for every John stretching back through time immemorial." He gestured towards the clearing where the chanting had reached a fever pitch. The apparition above the altar had fully formed now. A version of me, but twisted, powerful, terrifying. "That," my older self said, "is what we become. What we must become, to protect this town, to keep the darkness at bay. It's a heavy burden, John, but it's ours to bear." I shook my head, denial rising in my throat. No, I won't do it. I won't become... that." A look of sympathy crossed my older self's face. "I said the same thing all those years ago, but you'll see in time that we don't have a choice. The journal chose you, just as it chose me. The cycle must continue." He held out his hand, offering me his version of the journal. "Take it, read it, understand. And when you're ready, step into the clearing and take your place in the circle." My hand, seemingly of its own accord, reached out towards the offered book. As my fingers brushed its leather cover, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed before my eyes, years of rituals, of battles against unspeakable horrors, of a darkness held at bay by sacrifice and will. I jerked my hand back, gasping. "I can't," I whispered. "I'm not strong enough." My older self smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You are. You will be. We all doubted at first, but the strength is there, inside you, inside us." The chanting from the clearing had changed now. They were calling my name, not in demand but in welcome, in anticipation. "It's time, John," my older self said. "Time to face your destiny." I looked from him to the clearing and back, my mind a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and a growing sense of acceptance. Was I really considering this? As if reading my thoughts, my older self nodded. "You'll understand everything soon. The journal will guide you, as it guided me. And when your time comes, you'll be here, in my place, guiding the next John." He stepped aside, clearing the path to the clearing. "The choice is yours, John. It always has been. But remember, the fate of everyone you know, everyone you love, hangs in the balance." I stood there, frozen in indecision. The call of the ritual pulled at me, a siren song of power and purpose. But fear still held me back, fear of the unknown, fear of losing myself. In that moment, as the moon reached its zenith and the chanting reached a crescendo, I knew I had to make a choice. To run, to hide, to deny this strange and terrifying destiny, or to step forward, to embrace the unknown, to become something more than myself. With a deep breath, I made my decision. I took a step forward, then another, the journal clutched tightly to my chest. As I emerged from the trees, the chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned to me, a mix of relief and anticipation on the faces of friends and neighbors. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome, John," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "We've been waiting for you." As I reached out to take his hand, I felt a surge of energy course through me. The journal in my arms grew warm, almost alive. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that my life would never be the same again. The ritual had begun, and with it, my transformation into something both wonderful and terrible. The John I had been was about to die, and a new John, the John this town needed, was about to be born. My lungs burned as I tore through the dense underbrush, branches whipping across my face, leaving stinging welts in their wake. The sound of pursuit was close behind, too close. The rhythmic chanting that had filled the clearing moments ago had transformed into a savage war cry, echoing through the trees and spurring me on with primal fear. "You can't run from your destiny, John." Mayor Thompson's voice boomed from somewhere behind me. The kindly politician I'd known all my life was gone, replaced by something ancient and terrifying. I didn't dare look back. I knew what I'd see. A sea of hooded figures, people I'd once called friends and neighbors, now twisted into something unrecognizable by whatever dark power had taken hold of our town. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. For a moment I lay there, dazed and gasping. The journal, which I'd been clutching to my chest, skittered away into the underbrush. "There! He's down!" a voice cried out, much too close for comfort. Panic gave me strength. I scrambled to my feet, snatching up the journal as I rose. I couldn't leave it behind. Somehow, I knew it was the key to everything. I broke through the tree line, the parking lot where I'd left my car coming into view. It sat there, a beacon of hope in the moonlight. If I could just reach it, I might have a chance. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They were gaining ground. "John, stop this foolishness." Mrs. Johnson's voice, usually so warm and motherly, now dripped with malice. "You're only making this harder on yourself." I reached my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp the keys. The jingling sound seemed deafening in the night air, a beacon announcing my location to my pursuers. Come on," I muttered, finally managing to slide the key into the lock. Just as I wrenched the door open, a hand grasped my shoulder. I whirled around, coming face to face with Mr. Patel. His usually friendly face was contorted with a mixture of anger and... was that fear? "Don't do this, John," he pleaded, his grip tightening. "You don't understand what's at stake." I shoved him away with strength born of desperation. "You're right. I don't understand. And I don't want to." I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as several hooded figures emerged from the woods. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me, hungry and expectant. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas. The tires squealed in protest as I peeled out of the parking lot, leaving the cult members scrambling in my wake. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. The road stretched out before me, empty and inviting. Maybe I could make it. Maybe I could escape this nightmare and never look back. But as I rounded the first bend, my heart sank. There, in the middle of the road, stood a group of hooded figures. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable barrier. I swerved hard, barely missing them. In my rearview mirror, I saw them scatter, then reform, running after my car with inhuman speed. "This isn't happening," I gasped, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This can't be real." I floored the accelerator, the engine whining in protest as I pushed it to its limits. Trees whipped by in a dark blur. I had no destination in mind, no plan beyond away. Away from the cult, away from the ritual, away from the terrifying future that apparently awaited me. As I approached another turn, I saw more hooded figures waiting. I swerved again, tires screeching on the asphalt. How were they doing this? How could they be everywhere at once? The journal sat in the passenger seat, seeming to mock me with its presence. I was tempted to throw it out the window, to be rid of it once and for all. But something stopped me. Some deep instinctual part of me knew that the journal was my only hope of understanding what was happening. Suddenly, the engine sputtered. The car jerked once, twice, and then began to slow. "No, no, no," I cried, pumping the gas pedal frantically. But it was no use. The car rolled to a stop on a lonely stretch of road, surrounded on both sides by dense forest. For a moment, all was silent. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, heart pounding in my chest. Then slowly, I became aware of movement in the trees around me. They were here. I locked the doors, for all the good it would do. Hooded figures emerged from the darkness, surrounding my car. I counted at least 20 of them standing in a circle, silent and waiting. One figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, exuding an aura of authority that made the others shrink back. Slowly, deliberately, they reached up and lowered their hood. I felt the blood drain from my face as I found myself staring at me. An older version of me, face lined with years I hadn't yet lived, eyes glowing with an inner fire that both terrified and enthralled me. "Hello, John," my older self said, his voice, my voice, filled with a mix of sympathy and resolve. "I think it's time we had a talk." I shook my head, pressing myself back against the seat as if I could somehow meld with it and disappear. "This isn't possible," I whispered. My older self smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I said the same thing when I was in your position, but you'll come to learn that possible is a very flexible concept in our line of work." "Our line of work?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "I don't understand any of this." "I know," he replied, his tone softening. "And I'm sorry for that. Truly I am. But understanding comes with time and with acceptance." He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation or a demand. "Come out of the car, John. Face your destiny. Face me." I sat there, frozen in indecision. Part of me wanted to start the car again, to ram through their circle and keep driving until I ran out of road. But I knew it would be futile. Whatever power they possessed, whatever magic ran through this town and through my veins, it was bigger than me, bigger than my fear. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stepped out. The cool night air hit me like a physical force, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something old and powerful. My older self nodded approvingly. "Good. You're braver than I was. That will serve you well in the years to come." "Years to come?" I echoed. "What are you talking about? What is all this?" He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "It's a responsibility, John, a burden passed down through generations. We are the guardians, the protectors. We keep the darkness at bay." "The darkness?" I glanced around at the hooded figures, still standing silently in their circle. "You mean them?" My older self laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "No, John. They are like us, protectors. The darkness, well, you'll see it soon enough. And you'll understand why we do what we do." He held out his hand again. "Come. It's time to complete the ritual. Time for you to take your place in the circle." I took a step back, fear rising in my throat. "And if I refuse?" His eyes hardened, the glow intensifying. "Then the darkness wins, and everything, everyone you've ever loved will be consumed." I looked around, desperate for some way out, some alternative I hadn't considered. But there was nothing. Just the road, the woods, and the circle of hooded figures. My past and my future closing in around me. With a shaking hand, I reached out and grasped my older self's outstretched palm. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed before my eyes, battles against unspeakable horrors, rituals of incredible power, years of vigilance and sacrifice. I gasped, staggering under the weight of the visions. My older self steadied me, his grip firm and reassuring. "I know it's overwhelming," he said softly, "but you are ready. You've always been ready." As if on cue, the hooded figures began to chant. It was my name, over and over, building in volume and intensity. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy I could almost see. My older self began to lead me towards the center of the circle. With each step, I felt a change coming over me. My fear was fading, replaced by a sense of purpose, of destiny. As we reached the center, my older self turned to face me. "Are you ready to become who you were always meant to be, John?" I looked into his eyes, my eyes, and saw the weight of years, of responsibility, of power. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of calm certainty. "Yes," I heard myself say, "I'm ready." The chanting reached a fever pitch. My older self smiled, a genuine expression of relief and pride. "Then let it begin," he said. And as the moon reached its zenith and the forest seemed to hold its breath, I felt myself changing, becoming more than I was, becoming what I needed to be. The John I had been was slipping away, and in his place a guardian was being born, a protector, a keeper of secrets and battler of darkness. As the ritual reached its climax, I realized that the chase was over. I had been running from myself, from my destiny. But now, finally, I was ready to embrace it. Whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead, I would face them. Because I was John, the guardian of the town. And the darkness didn't stand a chance. The first thing I noticed was the throbbing pain in my head. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, each throb sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. I tried to reach up to rub my temples, but my arms wouldn't move. Panic set in as I realized I was bound tightly to a chair. My eyes fluttered open, adjusting slowly to the dim light. The room was small, bare except for the chair I was strapped to and a large, ornate mirror directly in front of me. The flickering light of candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, giving the whole scene an eerie, dreamlike quality. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse and weak. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered me. I strained against my bonds, but they held firm. As my eyes darted around the room, searching for any means of escape, they were drawn back to the mirror. Something about my reflection seemed off. I blinked, sure I was seeing things, but no, there it was again. My reflection had moved, but I hadn't. I watched, horrified, as my own face twisted into a smirk I knew I wasn't making. "Hello, John," my reflection said, its voice eerily similar to mine, but with a harder edge. "It's about time we had a proper chat." I recoiled as much as the restraints would allow. What is this? Who are you?" The reflection chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "I'm you, John. Or rather, I'm the part of you that you've been trying so hard to forget. The part that knows the truth." "The truth?" I echoed, my mind reeling. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," my other self said, rolling its eyes. "You've done such a good job of burying me, of pretending I don't exist. But I'm tired of being silent. It's time you remembered who you really are." As if triggered by those words, a flood of memories crashed over me. Images, sounds, sensations. All things I knew but had somehow forgotten. I saw myself writing in the journal, planning elaborate scenarios. I remembered orchestrating the events of the past few weeks, manipulating everyone around me. "No," I gasped, shaking my head in denial. "That can't be true. I found the journal in the woods. I was being stalked, hunted." "All part of the plan," my reflection interrupted. "Your plan, our plan. Don't you see? We've been playing both sides all along." The door to the room creaked open, and a group of hooded figures filed in. My heart rate spiked, expecting the worst. But as they lowered their hoods, I recognized the faces of my friends and neighbors. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, his expression a mix of concern and relief. "John," he said softly, "we're glad you're awake. How much do you remember?" I looked from the mayor to my smirking reflection and back. I'm not sure. Everything's confused. What's happening to me?" Sarah, my next-door neighbor, moved to stand beside the mayor. "We've been trying to protect you, John, from yourself, or rather from your other self." "Protect me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "By chasing me through the woods? By terrorizing me?" "We never chased you," Mr. Patel said, stepping forward. "That was all in your mind, part of the elaborate scenario you created." My reflection laughed, drawing everyone's attention. "Oh, don't act so innocent," it sneered. "You played your parts perfectly, just as I knew you would." Mayor Thompson sighed heavily. "We had no choice. When your condition first manifested, we tried to help you directly. But you rejected our help, retreated further into your delusions. This elaborate game was the only way we could think to draw you out, to make you face the truth." "The truth," I whispered. "What is the truth? Who am I really?" My reflection's grin widened. "We're a writer, John, a damn good one, but we got bored with just writing stories. We wanted to live them. So we created the ultimate story, a tale of mystery, conspiracy, and supernatural forces, and we made ourselves the star." Memories continued to flood back. I saw myself planning every detail, writing the journal entries, even orchestrating the chance discovery in the woods. I had manipulated everyone, including myself. "But why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would I do this to myself?" "For the thrill," my reflection answered. "For the challenge, to see if we could fool even ourselves. And oh, how well it worked. You believed every word, every moment. It was our greatest creation." The reality of what I had done, what we had done, hit me like a physical blow. I had put my friends through hell, had terrorized my own town, all for the sake of a story. The guilt was overwhelming. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, looking at the concerned faces around me. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't know." Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We know, John. That's why we're here. To help you, to bring you back to yourself. All of yourself." My reflection's expression softened slightly. "They're right, you know. We can't keep going on like this, divided. It's time to become whole again." I nodded slowly, the truth of those words resonating within me. But as I looked back at my reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My other self was reaching for something just out of view, something that glinted in the candlelight. A knife. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic rising in my voice. My reflection's grin turned feral. "Becoming whole, John. Just like we agreed. But there's only room for one of us in this body, and I'm not going back to being silent and forgotten." I struggled against my bonds with renewed vigor. "No, stop this. This isn't what I wanted." "Isn't it?" my other self taunted. "You wanted drama, danger, a climactic ending. Well, here it is, the final twist in our greatest story." The knife drew closer to the surface of the mirror. I could feel the others in the room tense, unsure of what to do. This was beyond anything they had prepared for. "Please," I begged, looking frantically between my reflection and the others. "Don't let this happen. I don't want to die." Mayor Thompson stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Now, let's all calm down. There's no need for violence. We can work through this together." My reflection laughed, a harsh, manic sound. "Together? There is no together. There's only me. There's only ever been me. And now it's time to cut away the weak parts." The knife touched the surface of the mirror, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was as if the blade was piercing my very soul. "Stop!" I screamed, throwing myself against the restraints. "I remember now. I remember everything." We don't have to do this. For a moment, my other self hesitated, the knife hovering just above the mirror's surface. You remember? I nodded frantically. Yes. I remember writing the journal, planning everything. I remember why we did it. But this isn't the ending we planned. This isn't how our story is supposed to go. A flicker of uncertainty passed over my reflection's face. Then how is it supposed to go? I took a deep breath, thinking quickly. We unite. We become whole, like you said. But not by destroying each other. By accepting each other. By becoming the person we were always meant to be. Both the creator and the creation. The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath. My reflection stared at me, searching my face for any sign of deception. I met its gaze steadily, willing it to understand, to believe. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the knife began to lower. And if we do this, my other self said cautiously, what then? What becomes of our story? I managed a small smile. We write a new one. Together. A better one. One where we don't have to hide from ourselves or hurt others. The knife clattered to the ground, disappearing from view. My reflection's posture relaxed, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of hope in my eyes. Together, it echoed, nodding slowly. I think I'd like that. As those words left my reflection's mouth, I felt a shift within myself. It was as if two pieces of a long broken puzzle were finally sliding back into place. Memories, personalities, desires, everything began to merge and settle. The restraints around my wrists and ankles suddenly loosened. I stood on shaky legs, supported by Sarah and Mr. Patel. As I approached the mirror, I no longer saw two distinct versions of myself. Instead, I saw just me, whole, united, and ready to face whatever came next. I turned to the group, seeing relief and cautious optimism on their faces. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion, for not giving up on me, for helping me find myself again. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, clasping my shoulder. Welcome back, John. The real John. We've missed you. As we left the room together, leaving behind the mirror and the remnants of my fractured self, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The story I had written for myself had come to an end, but a new chapter was just beginning, and this time I would write it as my true, whole self. The moment of unity I had felt was shattered as quickly as it had formed. My darker half, the part of me that had orchestrated this entire nightmare, wasn't ready to give up control so easily. I felt a violent surge within me, as if my very soul was being torn apart. No, I screamed, clutching my head. We agreed to work together. My reflection in the mirror sneered back at me, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I lied, it hissed. Did you really think I'd give up everything I've worked for so easily? The room began to spin, the candlelight creating dizzying patterns on the walls. I staggered, my legs giving out beneath me. As I fell, I caught glimpses of the others in the room. Mayor Thompson, Sarah, Mr. Patel, their faces a mix of horror and determination. John! Sarah cried out, reaching for me. But as her hand touched my shoulder, a jolt of energy sent her flying back. Stay back, I managed to gasp out. I have to do this alone. My body convulsed, and I felt as if I was being pulled in two directions at once. Memories flashed before my eyes, writing the journal, planting it in the woods, orchestrating the entire conspiracy. But alongside these were other memories, genuine fear, confusion, the desperate search for answers. Which were real? Which version of me was the true John? You're weak, my darker half sneered, its voice echoing in my mind. You've always been weak. That's why you created me, to be everything you're not. I gritted my teeth, fighting back against the invasion. No, I growled. I created you because I was afraid of my own potential, my own darkness. But I don't need you anymore. The cult members began to chant, their voices rising in a rhythmic cadence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel their intent. They were trying to banish my dark side, to exorcise the demon I had created within myself. John, Mayor Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. You have to fight this. Remember who you are. Remember why you started writing in the first place. Writing. Yes, I remembered now. The joy of creation, the thrill of bringing new worlds to life. Somewhere along the way I had lost sight of that pure passion, twisting it into something dark and destructive. My darker half laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, spare me the sentimental nonsense, we both know the truth. You loved every minute of this. The power, the control, watching everyone dance to our tune. And part of me knew it was right. There had been a thrill in orchestrating this elaborate scenario, in fooling even myself. But at what cost? I looked around at the faces of my friends, people I had manipulated and terrified for my own amusement. The guilt was overwhelming, threatening to consume me. That's right, my dark side purred. Feel the guilt. Let it swallow you whole. Then I'll be all that's left. But as I teetered on the brink of giving in, a memory surfaced. A simple moment years ago, when I had first put pen to paper, the pure joy of creation untainted by ego or darkness. No, I whispered, then louder. No, I won't let you win. I staggered to my feet, my body feeling like it was on fire. Every movement was a battle, my darker half fighting for control of each muscle. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it resonating within me, providing a counterpoint to the darkness that threatened to overwhelm me. You can't fight me forever, my dark side snarled. I am you, the best part of you. You're wrong, I gasped out. You're not the best of me. You're the part of me I need to overcome. I lurched towards the mirror, drawn to it like a magnet. In its surface, I could see both versions of myself. The terrified, determined man I was now, and the sneering, confident manipulator I had become. What are you doing? My dark half demanded, a note of panic creeping into its voice. I reached out, my hand closing around the handle of the knife that had clattered to the floor earlier. Ending this, I growled. Once and for all. The room seemed to hold its breath. The chanting faltered for a moment, then resumed with renewed vigor. I could feel the energy building, a palpable force that made the air crackle with tension. You can't destroy me, my dark half said, but I could hear the uncertainty in its voice. I'm part of you. You need me. I raised the knife, staring into my own eyes in the mirror. You're right, I said softly. You are a part of me, but not the part that's in control. With a final surge of will, I plunged the knife into the mirror. The surface shattered with an ear-splitting crack, fragments of glass exploding outward in a glittering cloud. I felt something break inside me, a dam bursting. Memories, personalities, desires. Everything that made me who I was came rushing together in a torrential flood. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as I fell to my knees amidst the shards of the broken mirror. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the words finally becoming clear. Two become one, darkness and light, unite the divide, set all to right. And then, suddenly, silence. I knelt there gasping for breath, surrounded by the glittering remnants of the mirror. Slowly, hesitantly, I raised my head to look at the others in the room. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. John, are you? I took a moment to assess myself. The turmoil that had been raging within me had subsided. I could still feel the darkness, the potential for manipulation and control, but it no longer felt like a separate entity. It was just a part of me, no more dominant than my creativity or my compassion. I think so, I said slowly. I think I'm whole again. Sarah rushed forward, helping me to my feet. "Oh, John," she said, tears in her eyes. "We were so worried. Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded, offering a small, tired smile. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I feel balanced." Mr. Patel approached, his usually cheerful face serious. "And the other you? The one who wrote the journal?" "He's still here," I admitted. "But he's not in control anymore. He's just a part of me now, not a separate personality." Mayor Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's as it should be. We all have our darker impulses, John. The key is to acknowledge them, to understand them, but not to let them rule us." I looked around at the faces of my friends, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything I put you through. For the manipulation, the fear." "Hush now," Sarah said, squeezing my hand. "We understand and we forgive you." Mr. Patel chuckled, some of his usual good humor returning. "Besides, it was quite the exciting story you wove for us. Perhaps not the most ethical way to go about it, but you can't deny it was thrilling." Despite everything, I found myself laughing. It felt good, cathartic. "I promise from now on I'll stick to writing my stories down, not living them out at everyone else's expense." As we made our way out of the room, leaving behind the shattered mirror and the remnants of my fractured psyche, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The battle within me was over, at least for now. I knew there would be challenges ahead, times when the darker part of me would try to assert itself. But now I had the tools and the support to face those challenges head-on. The journal that had started this whole ordeal lay forgotten on the floor. As we left, I paused to pick it up. Its pages were blank now, the twisted tales and dark prophecies erased along with my alter ego. "A fresh start," I murmured, running my hand over the leather cover. Mayor Thompson nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Indeed. And this time, John, let's write a story we can all be proud of." As we stepped out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. The battle within was over and I had emerged victorious, not by destroying my darkness but by embracing it as a part of my whole self. The future stretched out before me, a blank page waiting to be filled. And this time, I knew, the story I would write would be one of healing, of growth, and of the power of facing our inner demons head-on. With my friends by my side, and a newfound understanding of myself, I was ready to begin the next chapter of my life. A chapter where the only battles would be the ones I chose to write about, safely contained within the pages of a book. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding in my chest as I gasped for air. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. For a moment I lay there trying to separate reality from the vivid remnants of what felt like the most intense dream I'd ever experienced. Was it all just a nightmare? I whispered to the empty room, my voice hoarse as if I'd been screaming. Slowly I sat up, my body aching as if I'd run a marathon. My gaze fell on the nightstand beside my bed, and my breath caught in my throat. There, innocently resting on the polished wood, was the leather-bound journal that had been at the center of my supposed nightmare. With trembling hands I reached for it, half expecting it to disappear like a mirage. But it was solid, real, the leather cool and smooth beneath my fingers. I opened it, my heart racing as I flipped through the pages. They were blank, every single page, wiped clean of the frantic scribblings and dark prophecies I remembered writing. All except for the very last page, where a single sentence stood out in stark black ink. "The battle is won, but the war never ends." I stared at those words, trying to decipher their meaning. Were they a warning, a reminder, or simply the last lingering fragment of my fractured psyche? A knock at the door startled me out of my contemplation. "John?" Sarah's voice called out, tinged with concern. "Are you awake? We're all waiting for you." "All?" I croaked, confusion washing over me. What do you mean, all? There was a pause before Sarah responded, her voice careful and measured. The whole town is here, John. We need to know what happened. If you're ready to come out, that is. The implications of her words sent a chill down my spine. So it hadn't been just a dream after all. Somehow, the events of the past few weeks, the chase, the ritual, the battle within myself, had all been real. I'll be right out, I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. I dressed quickly, my movements automatic as my mind raced. What would I find when I stepped outside? How much did they know? And more importantly, which version of me had truly won the battle? Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Sarah stood there, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Oh, John," she said softly, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "How are you feeling?" I managed a weak smile. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It all feels like a dream, but it wasn't," she finished for me, nodding in understanding. "Come on, everyone's waiting." As we stepped out onto my front porch, I froze. The entire population of our small town seemed to be gathered on my lawn and in the street beyond. Their faces were a sea of emotions, concern, curiosity, and more than a little fear. Mayor Thompson stood at the forefront, his usually jovial face solemn. As I descended the steps, he approached, holding something wrapped in a cloth. "John," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed silence that had fallen over the crowd. "We need to know. Which version of you is standing before us now?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. I'm not sure," I admitted. "I feel like myself, but I can also remember everything. The journal, the chase, the ritual. It's all there, but it feels integrated somehow." The mayor nodded, as if this was the answer he'd been expecting. Slowly, he unwrapped the cloth, revealing the knife from my dreams, the one I had used to shatter the mirror, and presumably, my fractured psyche. "We found this in the old Simmons place," he explained, holding it out to me. "Right where it all ended. We thought you should have it." I stared at the knife, its blade glinting in the morning sun. Part of me wanted to recoil from it, to deny its existence and everything it represented. But another part, the part that had orchestrated this entire scenario, felt drawn to it. With a trembling hand, I reached out and took the knife. As my fingers closed around the handle, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished blade. For a moment, just a fleeting second, I saw both sides of myself, the frightened, confused John and the cunning, manipulative author, and they were both smiling. A gasp went up from the crowd, and I realized they had seen it too. I looked up, meeting the wide-eyed stares of my friends and neighbors. "Well," Mr. Patel's voice broke the silence, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "That's certainly interesting." "What does it mean?" someone in the crowd called out. I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. I think it means that both sides of me are still here. The part that was scared and confused, and the part that orchestrated everything. But they're not fighting anymore. We're whole." Mayor Thompson stepped forward, his eyes searching mine. "And can we trust this whole version of you, John? How do we know this isn't just another elaborate ruse?" It was a fair question, one that I had been asking myself since I woke up. I looked down at the knife in my hand, then back up at the faces of the people I had manipulated and terrified for weeks. "You can't know for sure," I said honestly. "I'm not even sure I can trust myself completely, but I promise you this: I will spend every day trying to make amends for what I've done. I'll use my writing to heal, not to hurt. And if I ever feel myself slipping back into that darkness, I'll come to you for help." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of approval and lingering uncertainty. Sarah stepped up beside me, taking my free hand in hers. "I believe him," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "The John I know is still in there, and now he's stronger, because he's faced his darkness and come out the other side." One by one, others began to voice their support. Mr. Patel, Mayor Thompson, even old Mrs. Johnson, who I had terrified in the woods. It wasn't universal. I could see doubt and fear in some faces, but it was a start. As the crowd began to disperse, Mayor Thompson pulled me aside. "You understand, John, that things can't just go back to normal. There will need to be precautions." I nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. "Of course. Whatever you think is necessary. I want to earn back your trust, all of your trust." He smiled, clapping me on the shoulder. "That's a good start. Now, what do you say we go down to the diner and get some breakfast? I have a feeling this is going to be a long day of explanations and apologies." As we walked down the street, the knife safely wrapped and tucked away in my pocket, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Guilt for what I had put everyone through, relief that it was over, and a cautious optimism for what the future might hold. The battle within me might be over, but as the journal had warned, the war never truly ends. It would be a daily struggle to keep my darker impulses in check, to use my creativity for good rather than manipulation. But as I looked around at the familiar faces of my neighbors, now tinged with a new understanding of the complexities within each of us, I felt ready to face that challenge. The story of John, the fractured writer who terrorized a town, had come to an end. Now it was time to write a new story, one of redemption, of community, and of the ongoing battle we all face to be the best versions of ourselves. As we entered the diner, the bell above the door chiming a welcome, I couldn't help but smile. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and for once I had no idea how it would end. And that, I realized, was the most exciting story of all.